Rain often falls steadily in our small village near Bergen, where the pines form a natural shelter. Most days, fog blankets the forest floor, creating an air of mystery. It was in this mist that I first encountered Grim, a small, scrappy creature hiding behind Torbjørn's shed. His bright yellow eyes flickered with a wild intensity, and he reacted to the gusty wind with a fierce hiss, as if it had let him down. I hadn't intended to save anyone. My focus was on fixing my roof, but seeing him struck a chord within me. We both seemed a bit out of place at that moment. The forest beyond Torbjørn's old shed was quiet and thick with moss, giving an impression of time moving slowly. The air was damp, filled with the earthy scent of wet wood and soil. A raven's call echoed in the distance, almost like a warning. There I found Grim again, wedged between a stack of rusty firewood and the decaying siding. He trembled, yet his gaze showed determination, filled with a deep-seated distrust that seemed almost instinctual. His fur was drenched and matted, revealing just how frail he was, but there was a fire in him that suggested he could defend himself fiercely. I crouched down, speaking softly, somewhat absurdly, as if my words could bridge the gap created by his past experiences with humans. I had no plan in mind, as I hadn't let Liv know I was going back for Grim. All I carried with me was a thin towel in one pocket and half a can of sardines in the other. I understood that if I reached for him too quickly, he might react defensively. At the same time, I realized those bitter cold nights were no place for such a small, vulnerable creature. Carefully, I placed the food between us and noticed how he twitched with uncertainty. In that moment, I mused. This wasn't simply about rescuing a kitten, it was about proving myself worthy of being near him. When I returned to Grim the next day, he didn't flee, but he also didn't let his guard down. He remained tense, a bundle of damp fur and defiance hidden among the wood and wire. When I checked, the sardines were gone. The empty can had been nudged aside, suggesting he had eaten while staying alert to his surroundings. I saw this as a small victory, a step forward, no matter how fragile it seemed. Every morning, I made my way to the same spot, arriving alone and quiet. I never tried to touch Grim. I simply sat nearby with a small offering, boiled chicken, a piece of smoked trout, even warmed milk, though he turned away from that one. As the days went on, the forest around us changed its mood. The rain turned into a gentle mist, birds returned to the branches above, and I began to notice a few other animals. There were 3 more strays, older and possibly related, drawn together by the same need for warmth and shelter. Misa watched us from the high rocks, Rune peeked out from the bushes with curious eyes, and Loke, the oldest, remained still by the stump as if keeping watch. Liv began asking where I went each morning, and Torbjørn cautioned me not to become too fond of ghosts. Yet, despite their warnings, I couldn't help but feel a bond with them. Each animal seemed to carry its own history, visible in their scars and behavior. But it was Grim, the most unpredictable of the bunch, who caught my attention. Then came the 7th morning, a day when everything changed. I arrived earlier than usual, the sky still dark, and the air thick with fog that made the path hard to see. There was an unusual sharpness in the air, a sense of alertness. As I rounded the corner by the shed, I noticed right away that the sardine tin was untouched, and Grim was missing from his usual spot. A sense of panic gripped me, not the loud kind, but a quiet, chilly tension that takes your breath away. I called out his name softly, though I knew it was pointless. He didn't know who I was yet. As I looked closer, I spotted a trail, small, wet paw prints leading through the mud in a chaotic pattern toward the thicket. My heart raced as I followed the trail, the sound of my pulse loud against the backdrop of rustling leaves. Behind a tangle of fallen birch roots, I found him. He wasn't snarling anymore. In fact, he was lying on his side, breathing faintly, with one eye half closed and a thin line of red trickling down his leg. I realized with a heavy heart that something had attacked him, perhaps a fox or one of the older males defending its territory. The weight of knowing I might have waited too long to help him felt like a stone in my chest. Without thinking, I wrapped him in my jacket, disregarding his weak swipe. For the first time, he allowed me to touch him. But it wasn't trust that I felt. It was his surrender. As I walked in, cradling a barely conscious, bleeding kitten in my jacket, Liv paused in the kitchen. She was covered in flour from making bread, and when our eyes met, I could tell she understood without needing any words. With a sense of urgency, she cleared a spot on the counter and laid out an old fleece blanket. Together, we gathered what supplies we could find: saline, cotton pads, a dropper, and a shallow bowl of warm water. We weren't veterinarians, but our experience with farm cats had taught us a thing or two. Sometimes, what you learn through life matters more than what you find in books. As I tended to the kitten's wound, which I later named Grim, he whimpered softly. It seemed more about confusion than pain. He didn't resist. Exhaustion had taken over, leaving him too weak to fight back. Liv kept glancing my way, but remained quiet until she quietly asked, "Are you sure he wants to live?" Her words hung in the air, making me uncomfortable. I didn't have a clear answer, and I wrestled with whether I was making the right choice. Our friend Torbjørn, upon hearing our predicament, suggested that nature was harsh for a reason. That night, Grim settled into a basket by the hearth, his chest rising and falling slowly, his tail twitching as he dreamt. I found myself sitting beside him, unable to take my eyes off him, even though I hesitated to reach out. By the end of the second week, Grim was holding his own. He was still wary, his ears flat and eyes sharp, but he was no longer on the brink of death. Liv had crafted him a little den next to the hearth, using old blankets and a cozy basket lined with fleece. Although he hissed if anyone got too close, he didn't bolt anymore. We respected his space, but a gradual change was evident. Rune and Maisa began spending more time around the house, watching us through the kitchen window. Even Loke paid us a visit one foggy morning, scratching at the back door as if he were a king, far too dignified to hunt for himself. Then the phone rang. It was our landlord from Oslo, letting us know he'd be coming in 2 weeks for a full inspection. The rules were clear: no animals allowed in the house indefinitely. Liv's face turned pale after she hung up. We were left with a decision to make and little time to spare. Should we risk hiding Grim, and possibly the others, if they wandered too close? Should we begin to find homes for the cats, those strays with no owners, wild and carrying the weight of their past? In the meantime, Torbjørn dropped by with some unsettling news. A neighbor's chicken coop had been raided, and rumors were spreading that the cats we had taken to feeding might be responsible. This situation didn't care about our good intentions. It focused solely on the consequences of our actions. There were many nights when I couldn't sleep, listening to the soft creaks of the wood stove as Grim shifted uncomfortably in his basket. His breathing was still labored from his healing wound. I would sit in the quiet, one hand resting on my chest and the other gripping the blanket, contemplating what I was doing. I reassured myself that this was just temporary. I was merely giving him a chance to heal, to eat well, to learn to trust again. Yet the reality was more complex. Each day he lingered, every cautious glance that lasted a moment longer, and his increasing comfort around me wrapped me deeper into a situation I wasn't sure how to navigate. Liv, being the practical one, gently but firmly reminded me that we couldn't keep him forever. We lacked the space and the permission. Still, I noticed the same hesitation in her voice, the weight of uncertainty when she said, "We'll figure it out tomorrow." Yet tomorrow kept arriving. I understood that Grim wouldn't need us indefinitely, but the thought of him being returned to the harshness outside, facing the cold, hunger, and fear, felt like a burden I wasn't ready to bear. When Grim disappeared, it felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath me. It had only been 3 weeks since I first brought him inside, 3 weeks marked by small moments of progress. He had begun to relax around me, even looking into my eyes without the usual hostility. But then, without any warning, he was gone. I discovered the back door slightly open, just a crack, but enough for him to slip through. He vanished into the fog that morning, taking with him all the fragile trust we had formed. I rushed into the woods, calling his name, hoping he would recognize it. My boots sank into the wet ground as I followed the paw prints that eventually faded near the stream. Hours later, Liv stepped outside, quietly scanning the surroundings. I could see the concern in her eyes mirrored in my own. I felt afraid, not just of losing him, but also of what it signified if he had left on his own. Did he still see me as a threat? Had I gone too far in trying to help him, or not far enough? That same afternoon, Torbjørn came by with some important news. He had heard that neighbors were getting ready to set traps. They were blaming the cats for the mess made in the coop and the trash bins scattered around. Even though we had no proof that Grim or the other cats were responsible, the village had made their decision. Out there in the fog, Grim was roaming, injured, wild, and now in danger. I felt lost, unsure of how to track him down again. The house felt empty for the following 2 days. Even with Misa curled up on the windowsill and Rune showing up each morning with bright, eager eyes, there was still a noticeable void. It was as if something was missing, making the space feel incomplete. Every morning, I would search deeper into the forest than I probably should have, calling out for Grim with a hope that seemed to grow weaker with each passing hour. Liv kept the fire burning and put food out by the shed, but we both knew it was about more than just trying to bring him back. It was about holding on to the hope that he might still come home. Then on the third night, as the wind howled against the cabin and sleet started hitting the roof, I heard a sound at the back door. It wasn't a scratch or a cry, just the faintest thump, like something small leaning against it, trying its best to get in. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, mud-covered, shaking, one eye nearly shut, but still standing. He didn't run when he saw me. He didn't hiss. Instead, he stood there in the cold, swaying slightly, caught between the life he'd escaped and the one he was unsure about. Without thinking, I scooped him up. He felt lighter than before and carried the sense of pine, damp earth, and fear. Yet as I cradled him against my chest, he didn't resist. He let out the softest, strangest sound, somewhere between a sigh and a purr, like a storm starting to calm. That night, for the first time, he slept in my lap. Something changed within me. It felt like this wasn't just about rescuing him anymore. Perhaps it was also about finding a place where we both belonged. Grim's return should have felt like a victory, but instead, it only added to the tension in the house. The landlord was due to visit in just 5 days, and our attempts to keep the cats hidden were no longer working. Rune had started sneaking in through the back door whenever it was left open, leaving muddy paw prints on the floor. Misa had taken to curling up on Liv's bed each night, purring against her chest as if she had always been meant to be there. Even Loke, the seasoned warrior, now spent his mornings on the porch, as if he were waiting for a meal and a moment of calm before disappearing into the thicket. Liv and I found ourselves having quiet disagreements in the kitchen, our voices low but filled with a tension that felt almost palpable. She insisted we needed to make a decision soon. We could find a new home for 1 or 2 of the cats, perhaps convince a friend from the next town over to take one in. But keeping them all, especially Grim, who still hissed at strangers and only allowed me to touch him, seemed unrealistic. It felt like a risk, not just to our living situation, but to the fragile peace we had created. I took a moment before I responded. My gaze shifted to Grim, who was curled up in his basket near the hearth. His one good eye tracked my movements with an exhausted vigilance. He would still flinch when I moved too quickly and wouldn't eat if anyone else was around. Yet, he chose to stay close, closer than he ever had before. It left me grappling with a difficult question. If I let him go or entrusted him to someone else who didn't understand the battle still raging within him, would I be helping him or betraying him? The morning before the landlord was scheduled to arrive, I stood outside, cradling a now cold mug of coffee, gazing into the mist while Misa wove between my legs and Rune chirped carefree from the stone wall. Inside, Liv had already packed the blankets, wiped down the surfaces, and hidden the food bowls beneath the sink. The house was reverting to its former self, calm, catless, and easily forgotten. But the emptiness left in its wake was impossible to ignore. Grim watched from the windowsill, tense and inscrutable. I could sense he was attuned to the shift in our atmosphere. He hadn't left my side the night before, not once. When I sat on the floor, he pressed his delicate body against my leg, and for the first time I truly felt the weight of his trust, raw, undeserved, and absolute. And now I was being asked to give him up, not for his own safety, but for mine. Liv finally articulated what we had both been avoiding. "We can't pretend this isn't happening. You know that," she said, her voice steady yet softer. There was no anger, no coldness, just fatigue. What happens if they discover the truth? What if he's taken away? I wanted to scream, to cry, to confront whoever decided that compassion must come with conditions. But all I could manage was, I don't know. I found myself at a crossroads, unsure of what was right anymore. Letting Grim go felt like it would change something deep within me. That night, we faced a decision. We could hide them, find them new homes, or confront whatever consequences might arise. Each choice carried its own risks. Yet, keeping Grim and the others began to feel like the only real certainty I could embrace. Around noon, our landlord arrived. He was punctual, well-dressed, and carried a clipboard as if he were inspecting a property rather than stepping into people's lives. Liv greeted him on the front steps, her smile polite and practiced, though it seemed fragile. I stayed hidden in the back room, crouching near the place where Grim had settled under the bed. Rune and Maisa were tucked away in the attic, while Loke had slipped into the woods before dawn, as if he sensed what was about to happen. We had done everything we could, yet sitting there in the dim light, I felt a tension in the air, as if every breath counted down to something. I heard footsteps on the porch and voices that began friendly but then grew louder as they approached. The sound of a door creaking open followed, along with laughter and the scrape of a chair. Then there was silence, a long, heavy pause that made me shiver. When I glanced toward the hall, I spotted Grim's eyes peering at me from the shadows. He didn't seem afraid. Instead, he looked calm, as if he had come to terms with whatever might happen next. Maybe I needed to find that same sense of peace. In a stroke of fortune, the landlord didn't notice them. He moved through the main rooms, made a few notes, and then left with a simple handshake and nod. There were no questions, no accusations, just the sound of a car door slamming and the crunch of tires on gravel. We had made it through, but it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt more like standing on a cliff's edge, knowing that just because we hadn't fallen yet didn't mean we were safe. That night, Grim settled into my lap without prompting. His purr was soft and uneven, as if it didn't come easily, but it was genuine. In a world filled with uncertainty, that was enough. The next morning was eerily calm. The fog had lifted, and for the first time in weeks, sunlight streamed through the trees, casting golden rays on the porch and pooling on the cabin's floor. It should have been a moment of completion, but instead, it felt like a new beginning, one I wasn't entirely ready for. The crisis was over, but the questions lingered. Liv poured coffee while watching Maisa sit by the window, her tail flicking in relaxed defiance. Rune was curled up in a sun-drenched spot by the hearth, sound asleep. Grim was nestled against my leg, breathing steadily. It was the first time I'd seen him sleep so peacefully, so close. In that quiet moment, a realization struck me. This was no longer just a temporary situation. We weren't merely rescuing these animals. We were part of a bigger journey made up of small, meaningful choices. I glanced at Liv. We exchanged knowing looks without saying a word. We had made a decision. We wouldn't give them up. Not Grim, not any of them. We didn't fully understand what lay ahead. Perhaps we'd be discovered. Maybe our landlord would come back. We could end up moving, explaining ourselves, and starting over. But the thought of sending Grim back into the unknown felt wrong. He wasn't just surviving now. He was learning to trust, to feel at home. We weren't just rescuers. We had become his family. Later that day, as the cats roamed through the cabin as if they belonged there, Liv let out a genuine laugh for the first time in weeks. I stood by the window, watching Grim stretch and yawn like he was the ruler of his own domain. In that moment, I pondered. Perhaps we didn't save him after all. Maybe he had rescued something within us. Months have passed, and each morning still feels special. Grim now greets the day from his spot on the windowsill, no longer flinching at footsteps or dodging hands reaching out to him. His scars remain, some visible, others felt only when he curls up close, purring like distant thunder, but he feels whole in a way I never anticipated. He isn't completely domesticated. That wild spirit lingers, sharp as a cherished memory. Yet that very wildness is what makes his trust so precious. Maisa has claimed the kitchen as her domain. Rune follows Liv around like a loyal shadow. Even Loke, whom we worried might wander off again, has found his place by the porch, keeping watch over us with quiet grace. They've grown beyond just companions. They're woven into the fabric of our lives, unexpected, yet utterly vital. but I still find myself thinking about what could have happened if Grim hadn't returned that night. What if I hadn't listened to that instinct deep down telling me this mattered more than convenience or comfort? Rescue isn't always straightforward. It can be messy and complex, but it's real. Life can often feel chaotic and filled with choices that leave us wondering if we made the right ones. If you're here, chances are you can relate. Perhaps you've experienced that same urge to explore and understand. If this narrative resonated with you, consider sharing it with others. You might also want to subscribe and keep following along. There's still more ahead. Grim's journey continues, and so does mine.